Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U Film Studies, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, an adjunct professor here in the Film Studies department, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and Football Studies. During our regular Gooner U episodes, we cover the past week's events in Arsenal, the Premier League, and other soccer topics. But during our Film Studies episodes, we discuss a film from the annals of soccer film history and share our insights about film, history, and our knowledge of the beautiful game. This week, we watched 1992's Rodney Dangerfield vehicle Ladybugs, as well as 2005's Will Ferrell vehicle, Kicking and Screaming. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. I hope you're as excited as I am for this little divergence into the wonderful world of American youth soccer.
Yeah, definitely a different experience than I had. Of course, I think at least Ladybugs and possibly Kicking and Screaming is playing at a slightly higher level than I lasted through. But you're dressed snazzily, I must say, today.
Yes, I was inspired this evening to pull out my old kit from the LaGrange Soccer Club. Impressive that it actually still fits. I don't know what that says about me as a child or me as an adult. I don't know which is. Also, as I pointed out to you, I wear number 36, which tells you a lot about how much I played, I think, based on our conversation about numbers. But it's interesting because I played roughly between these two eras of children's. I'm just a little too young to have been with, the Rodney Dangerfield, Ladybugs gang.
Right.
But also, I was in college by the time Kicking and Screaming came out.
Right.
So I can't, but it's interesting looking at essentially the same world, but doing so about a decade or so apart. And I think it says a lot about, this is the historian in me talking about the way America's changed in just the decade between the early 90s and the early mid 2000s.
Yeah, and certainly America's sense of humor, as we'll talk about shortly when we discuss Ladybugs.
which is without a doubt the most portentous thing anyone has ever said about Ladybugs and Kicking or Screaming. Definitely not Kicking and Screaming.
All right, so let's get started with Ladybugs to begin with. We'll kind of... Do you have any opening thoughts on this movie?
I guess it's interesting. We talk about technological changes. As I started watching this, you sort of see like the quality of, I don't want to say the quality of the picture, but it's definitely done. And my initial thought was with Dangerfield, this must have been, I don't know, maybe late 80s. And I saw it was 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did enjoy the Colorado Foxes reference that was in there. That was fun. We can talk about that later.
Okay.
But I have to say, it was one that it kind of grew on me as it went along. I think there were still some problems with it, but as it was going along, I actually liked it a lot more as it went along as a movie. I don't know what you sort of think.
Yeah, my opening statement was going to be pretty similar. I mean, overall, I had no idea what to expect going in. My son didn't want to watch this one with me because the cover scared him. I guess Rodney Dangerfield's bulging eyes was something he had not heretofore seen. Yeah. But I did not know what to expect. I have not seen too many movies with him. I think Caddyshack is the only one I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen with him. But yeah, it was good. Overall, I give it a thumbs up. It was a movie that I definitely enjoyed watching and would revisit in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned Caddyshack and or Back to School. I suspect this is one of those. In both cases, obviously, we're dealing with two very famous comedic actors, comedians, and then comedic actors as well. I think we're dealing with some of the weaker entries in their overall, their oeuvre, if you will. Am I saying that right? I don't know. This is the film.
I don't know. It's not how I'd say it, but I'm in no position to say you're wrong.
Yeah. But you and I both took Spanish in high school, so
yeah, exactly. We're off the hook for French pronunciation. So. So yeah, overall, I mean, just like a high-level summary, overall, Ladybugs was a thumbs up. Overall, Kicking and Screaming was a thumbs down. And what I will say is, too, I ended up, because we're doing the show about them, I watched each of them twice. Cool tip, by the way, because Ladybugs I rented because it wasn't streaming any place that I subscribed to. Watching it in the TV app that Apple provides on its platforms, I was able to watch it the second time at 2x speed. So if anyone else is ever kind of watching a movie for analytical rather than entertainment purposes, I guess you could say I watched it kind of 1.5 times, but it was the whole thing sped up the second time through. So I liked Ladybugs more the second time. I liked kicking and screaming less.
So I guess a lot of sports movies really aren't about sports. They're vehicles for talking about other things. I mean, the most famous version of this is Rocky, which is of course about boxing, but not really about boxing at all. That's just, and in this one, I think this is one where I think Ladybugs does particularly well. Is I think it develops its characters well, and as a result, you can really it's really not about. The soccer is just a vehicle for them to talk about their relationships with one another. Particularly in this case, obviously the important relationship is between Rodney Dangerfield and his future stepson. Spoiler alert, if you will. And how that develops. And I think they both come off to me as again, in the context of a comic movie, relatively real characters. You can see a certain sense of growth. They get one-liners in, but they also clearly, take a few shots as well. And I think they really come off. You can see the more I think about it, look at them, you can see their development. Whereas much of the rest of them are fairly just sort of stock kind of cardboard characters, right? They're just there for one-liners and jokes to be played off. But I think some of them, but for the most part, yeah, it's really about the two of them and how they develop both as people, which I think works overall.
Right. And overall, one criticism I have that these movies share is, they grow as people. They really don't grow as coaches, and they don't really try to become better coaches, which you would think could be part of the story, but really isn't.
Yeah, I guess, again, I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about other movies that are similar to this. I guess the real comparison point is, for me, would be a movie like Mighty Ducks,
right?
Which is really about the emotional growth of Emilio Estevez,
right.
Gordon Bombay, and how he becomes a better person by coaching. But that's not what this is about. The kids are the vehicles for the comedy. It's kind of, and I say this as an unabashed fan of Mighty Ducks. Like, he is essentially playing a dramatic character in a kid's comedy. Rodney Dangerfield is playing himself, as he does, in what is a comedy. And so everyone around him is there to sort of set him up for jokes, which they do fairly effectively, we should point out. But,
and the jokes are certainly his style with one-liner after one-liner that, mostly hits, a couple misses, but, overall pretty enjoyable.
And I do think he sort of gets to a point, and argue, I will make a really, we'll draw the soccer comparison back to this. I think you can almost see an evolution in terms of the development of the coach as an individual. In a sense, like, the idea of you're not going to get a nuanced conversation about tactics in these movies. You get frankly, more than I expected in a lot of ways. But I do think you sort of see, in some ways, an evolution of the coach as a character. We can draw a line, I think, from Rodney Dangerfield to Will Ferrell to Ted Lasso, who obviously he's a more fully realized coach, comes into the environment as someone who maybe doesn't know the sport but understands the idea of coaching and leadership. But they sort of become, as much as you're going to get in the early 90s or mid 2000s, a version of that. It's in the end, it doesn't really matter how much of the tactics you know. Especially at the youth level. And I'll ask you this as a youth coach. I mean, would you say you have a fairly developed tactical acumen?
At the age level I'm coaching right now, it does not matter at all.
Exactly.
No, I mean, in baseball more than soccer, although I've come a long way with soccer. But yeah, with 8 and under, which is where I'm at right now, strategy does not come into play. It's all we can do to teach them tactics and repeat the tactical thinking enough that they can handle certain tactical situations. That's strategy will not come in at least for another couple of years, probably. But yeah, skills and tactics is the best I can hope for at this age.
Exactly. So I do think we should talk about the one part of it that, well, I don't want to say it ages poorly, but it definitely fits under the rubric of would be much harder to make jokes about now, and that's of course the character, the stepson, future stepson Matthew,
Right.
dressing like a girl,
Right. For comic effect.
for comic effect, and of which they make quite a lot of comic effect on.
Yes.
Throughout the course of the movie. And you made the comment, there's one scene where he's switching back and forth between his two personas, his real one, and it is very, I think you made the comment, and it was very Mrs. Doubtfire-esque.
Right. A year before Mrs. Doubtfire came out.
But and the rapid switching back and forth, I thought was a very that I have to say was probably the best scene in the overall movie. The way they sort of the way they sort of keep doing that. But yes, it does lead to a great deal of It does lead to a lot of awkward humor and a couple of pedophilia jokes, which are almost telegraphed. Like, they seem almost obvious, but they are still rather funny.
Yeah, no, they are, and I think that's one thing this movie left me feeling was pining for days when you could make jokes. The general audience wasn't perceived as having such a thin skin. I don't know that the audience actually has a thinner skin today. I wouldn't posit that, but they were able to write comedy that, maybe it does offend somebody. It's possible, but it's comedy.
It does remind me of the line of Mel Brooks. You and I, of course, are both big fans of Mel Brooks. Yeah. Having seen one of his classics, Blazing Saddles, and he, as I'm sure you've heard this line where he jokes that people tell him, "Boy, you couldn't make that movie today." And he goes, "Today, I couldn't make it in 1971."
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, and by the way, not to bring us down from talking about the comedy of the movie, but I didn't know. So Jonathan Brandis, who played Matthew/Martha, all I ever knew him from was It. The original '90s Tim Curry adaptation of Stephen King's It. Which he was good in that, and overall all the kids in that movie were good. Seth Green was the only one who I was aware of going on to other things later in life, and you don't think much of it because that happens to most child stars. Most of them kind of get out of acting at some point. There are few that stick with it. I didn't realize with him though, he died tragically young, which I was sad to learn reading about this movie.
No, I did see that as well. Yeah, he apparently was a very well-regarded young actor. I didn't realize he was in it. Of course, flipping through his filmography on Wikipedia and IMDb, obviously, popped up in a bunch of, at random episodes of a bunch of things. He was also in a really fascinating Civil War movie called Ride with the Devil, which was a Tobey Maguire mostly about guerrillas in Missouri, which is kind of it's an interesting Civil War movie. But I didn't realize he was in that as I looked through that. He was not, however, the one who stood out to me. The one who most caught my attention, all jokes aside, was actually his female opposite. I don't remember any of the characters' names. His
Kimberly.
Friend, Kimberly, that was it. Is right. Yep. Vanessa Shaw, who actually the next year is in Hocus Pocus. She's the female lead. I guess is not quite the right word.
Love interest. She was in Hocus Pocus. She was also in, I believe, 40 Days and 40 Nights with Josh Hartnett. She's been in a couple things, and she was good in this. She was really good. This is her first movie, I'm pretty sure. Which
is really just fascinating. I have to say, just thinking about. Because I did not see Ladybugs when it came out. This is not a children's movie. This is a movie. This is definitely not a movie for kids. But I did see when it came out Hocus Pocus, and so for me, it's fascinating to think about those two movies being chronologically right next to each other. Even though, for me as an audience, they're going to come at very different points in your life because of what they are. So, that was kind of a weird. Again, this is one I look back. They've both been around long enough. I mean, Kicking and Screaming he's almost 20 years old, which is a wild thing to say out loud. But it's kind of interesting to sort of look at them and see them and talk about some of the people in them and think about where when these came out. They aren't, for us at least, in the distant past, and they both existed in our lifetimes and are talking about and are, unlike, for example, the last one we did talking about a dramatization of an event from the 1950s.
Right.
This is sort of in a world that, as I sort of said, you and I kind of recognize from slightly different, from a couple different angles, both not just the experience of youth soccer, but also being younger in these. I mean, we were kids in the age of Ladybugs, not necessarily for kicking and screaming, but certainly not something that was entirely. The two movies are closer together chronologically than either of them is to We Are Right Now. To something to think about in terms of chronology. So I kind of find that's interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, a lot of other actors in there that like I sort of recognize, or maybe one or two things, but for the most part, yeah, I'm surprised how many of them don't seem to appear again, which is interesting.
Yeah. So the movie opens at a self-help guru talk very oddly, and this is where we're introduced to Chester Lee. This is Rodney Dangerfield's character. It moves very quickly from there into his office. We're introduced at the very beginning to Jackie. I guess that's how it's pronounced. It's Jackie with an accent on the first of the two E's at the end. I guess it's Jackie. Apparently she was a personality in the 90s. I don't remember ever seeing her in anything else. I don't know if you were familiar with her. Yeah, so I can't say I'm a fan, but she's there in this movie. So the first Rodney Dangerfield one-liner I have written down is, if I'm on hole, there's a reason for it. You're contagious. This is like through the window as someone's like giving him a hard time about something.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's and that's sort of Rodney Dangerfield's character, right? As much as he's always, about how he gets no respect, he's very quick to turn insults back, and he gets into several of those, right? Back and forth, sort of a back and forth insult, sequence with someone else, and he always sort of comes out on top of those, of course. And he is a professional. He is the star. But,
and it's scripted.
And it's scripted, of course, but
So yeah, they very quickly get to the point that, for him to get this promotion that he assumes he's going to get, and the rug is pulled out from under him, for him to secure this promotion, he's got to coach this girls' soccer team to victory. They always win. His company sponsors the team, and it's very, very important that his boss win, always winning, right? So that's set up very early on. We can tell from the very beginning he has absolutely no idea about soccer at all. That is revealed in some pretty funny dialogue.
Which you have to say, talk about the timing of the movie comes out at a period where most Americans' exposure to soccer is fairly limited. So, I mean, I guess it's, or I should say, for a longest time, soccer was a sport that little kids played, right? I mean, this was a sport where you play, it wasn't something they thought about as being like in an advanced tactical or professional environment. The way we obviously talk about Arsenal or even Major League Soccer, nothing like that. It was just, kids are going to run around for a little bit, for a couple hours, and then they'll be tired, and then it's fine.
But yeah, I love, so he's like asking him, oh, you played soccer? What position did you play? I was a kicker. And yeah, he's describing the other positions as sweeper, which actually good, like sweeper, forward. He starts out on the right track, and then he says outfield and tight end. Yeah. He's mixing in baseball and football all at once.
Yeah, all double entendres, of course. But not, again, it's the kind of movie it is.
Yeah. So we're pretty quickly introduced to the team, which we get just enough from all of them to have like a couple laughs and have a general idea of who they are. And then there's like 2 to 3 of the team members besides Kimberly who actually show up multiple times and who develop a little bit, who are characters that we track a little bit. But what had me laughing the most during this introduction was when the one kid who had actually played the year before on the championship team, all the other kids are new, and she tells him that we are in what the pros would call a rebuilding year.
Yeah, that was an interesting, it's just an interesting thing, the idea of the continuity of how these sort of teams exist or develop. Because when I played, you signed up every year, and you generally had the same kids on your teams every year. But it's interesting, as you got older, of course, people started to find other things to do. And so the teams got There were
Right.
like when I started, and granted I started in North Carolina, but like we could have, the town had 8 teams. And then by the time I got to in New York, playing for the Grange, we had tons of teams. Like my brother, a few years behind me, had tons of teams all in the Grange. But by the time you get to older years, like late middle school, or even some people played even through high school, by that point you had enough kids for 1, maybe 2 teams. And so you start increasingly playing teams from other towns. And, for us, like in our region, as I'm sure you know, like high school soccer was actually a fairly big deal.
Yeah.
And so, if you were any good, you played for your high school. So the ones we were left with were not, and I say this as one of them, there were reasons we weren't doing. I mean, granted, we had other things going on, other things that happened. The nice thing was I could play rec league soccer where I could show up, maybe not every game, because I had other things that were going on, as did the others. As opposed to obviously when you go into the high school, you're that's your priority. This is the top level of the sport at that point, and so,
right. Yeah, I think also what plays into the makeup of the team too is like, and as a kid, like you aren't generally necessarily aware of this, but it depends on the league that you're playing in too, whether it is a rec league or a more competitive league. And at the more competitive levels, and I see this more with soccer, although it exists definitely in like baseball, travel teams and stuff too, you'll have like a team that is its own entity, that they choose who's on their team and they join a league to find other teams to play against, compared to at the rec level where you have the league creating the teams and populating the teams and choosing who's going to play against who each day. But that overall it's a more centrally controlled thing versus a club structure, which is what it seems like Ladybugs and also Kicking and Screaming follow, where it's like the coach is running and managing the team and it's kind of a separate entity,
right. And it's so it's very interesting, the idea of the sort of the consistent team that appears every single year, right? The idea of the program, which clearly they don't really name it, but they're clearly talking about a specific age group, and of course you have players that age out,
right?
Which is where you do get to the idea of the rebuilding year,
right,
which is in that kind of almost like a franchise, almost like a professional team that or I guess maybe college is sort of the better. But you get players for a certain period in their age, and you're sort of as good as they are.
Right. Yeah. So we get to see them practicing a bit. We see where their skill level is or actually isn't. We get another instance of jokes that probably wouldn't be told in a movie today, even though it's hilarious. And Jack Hay is trying to tell Rodney Dangerfield, black people are the best at sports. And he's like, what do you mean? What about hockey and water polo? And he reaches for a couple other examples. It's pretty funny.
Right. The obvious, sort of those obvious ones.
Yeah. So it moves forward a little bit. He finds out that Matthew, the girlfriend's son, was kicked off of his JV soccer team, and he has the light bulb moment where he realizes that he can put this to his use somehow, right? And we're thinking that maybe he's going to learn the game from him and maybe have him assistant coach or something like that. And no, that wasn't exactly what he had in mind. So we end up with Matthew and Chester, and the players are really bad, and he's watching them. And he has the dream sequence with Kimberly to the Everly Brothers. All I have to do is dream, which was really, this is a hilarious sequence, like seeing this like 10, 11-year-old kid imagining his future with this girl who he likes, and there's just so many things that are just comically like not how adults act, but in this kid's imagination, like what he imagines his future could be like. That was really, really good to me. So then the ball goes to him, he throws it back, and he tells Chester, okay, this is what we need to do to win the games, right? And like that he's going to be the central midfielder and take control from the middle of the field and kind of control the game, which is what ends up happening, right? We go to a second game and Martha dominates and she's yelling the whole time. It's like Norman Bates is playing soccer.
Yeah. And we talk about the character's growth, right? For him, it's about his growth from being individualist, which they talk about him getting kicked off his other team. It's clearly because he's a jerk to his teammates, right? He's a troublemaker. And, we can talk about how that's, he's got a single mom and maybe a bit of a latchkey kid. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, it was the early 90s. Like, that was not an unusual thing. And so, sort of putting yourself in that part of the team, and interesting trying to do so. The idea of a guy being amidst the girls and having to do that, and sort of understanding that you treat them, you treat them somewhat differently.
But it's interesting to me. So first of all, thank you for pointing out that was probably why he was kicked off the JV team. I hadn't made that connection. That is clearly what probably happened there. But what's interesting to me is when that scene is over, you get Chester kind of telling him how to act on the field, but he's talking about how to act like a girl. The specific things that he's doing wouldn't be okay even with a team full of boys. This is like basic sportsmanship and decorum. Like this, what he was doing would not be good no matter who. Now, you do definitely coach girls differently than you coach boys. The same approaches don't work, and that's something you need to be aware of as a coach of a team. But what he was doing wouldn't be okay with anybody. And like you said, it is probably how he got kicked off of the JV team, and that's lost on Chester. Like it at least doesn't come across in his character like this is not how you act on the field. You don't treat people that way.
Right. And we are dealing with a period where the differences between men and women were seen as much greater. And so the idea that he would be shouting and demanding, and we see some of that too with the notion of coaching as it existed when we see talk about kicking and screaming, right? That there's a difference between the way, men are expected to act versus the way you act around women. Look, these are, obviously these are kid sports, the level of competitiveness. Obviously, the higher you go, the competition level. We scrimmaged a couple times against girls teams our age, and we were just sort of at the age where differences were starting to become apparent, but like not so much that they were like it. You'll hear these stories of like the U.S. women's national team, arguably the best. We're playing, right. a U19 team. Now, obviously, we're talking about an incredibly talented collection. And struggling with them because at that point, by the time he gets to 19, the physicality and it really starts to differentiate. We'd scrimmage against them sometimes. Now we're 15-ish years old, and they were mean. they were not afraid to. I took a few kicks. I was like, what's going on here? They were not afraid to be physical or to be competitive, and that's just again, that's partly kind of that's the nature of the sport, especially at the youth level. You'll have some kids who care a great deal, and then you have some who are like, I'm sort of here to run around a bit, and I'm here because my mom makes me, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting mix that you get at that level. And you sort of see that a little bit with the characters they have there. They don't obviously they're, again, as we said, they use the term cardboard cutouts, right? They're not really fully developed characters, but they're there to create jokes. But you could get the sense that if you actually broke them out into fully fleshed three-dimensional figures, they're on the teams for, they're not all there because, this sport is my passion and I want to play. You can't imagine them in Arteta, with Arteta saying, when I lose a duel, I am upset. I play, these are the standards. You can't imagine that sort of thing with most of them. And of course, with youth sports, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of a fascinating thing.
Yeah. To me. So we move from the pitch to the mall, and we get the first round of pedophilia jokes as Martha is trying on dresses with Chester in the dressing room. That was a little difficult to watch. It was played like so obviously, like you don't know how the woman sitting there acting like it's the most shocking thing that ever happened. Like, you don't know how she doesn't understand that there's something more satisfactory as an explanation, but yeah. So there's that, and then the women's room gag. Oh, the mall's on fire. I don't know what he thought that was going to do, but so the boss tells them that he's happy they almost won the last game, and then we meet Coach Annie. So Coach Annie was I guess you would say, butch woman who was wearing a U.S. soccer hat. I don't know if that's some women's soccer stereotype I'm not aware of or something, but she becomes the butt of a few one-liners from Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah. Obviously, her real purpose as a character is to go back and forth with Rodney Dangerfield in terms of one-liners. But it does actually speak to a certain stereotype that existed for a long time, somewhat negatively about women's sports, right? About how only certain kinds of women played sports. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they sort of toy with that with some of the girls on the Ladybugs team. I mean, it's why I was thinking about this as I was watching, as I saw that scene. The seminal moment for women's soccer in the U.S. is sometimes given as the 1999 World Cup, where they win the World Cup in the U.S. Most famous for they beat China in a penalty shootout in the final, and most famous, as I'm sure you've seen the picture, Brandi Chastain takes off her jersey. And at the risk of being overly crude, as we talk about Rodney Dangerfield and Will Ferrell movies, part of what made them so interesting and arguably made them help increase their popularity was they were women who you maybe didn't object to them taking their shirts off, if I may. But the point was they were conventionally attractive women, which went in the face of the stereotype that these were the kind of women who actually played sports. They were, very masculine and a lot, not just in their attitudes, but also physically as well. And I think this is just playing with that basic stereotype. That's really all this is that playing with that basic stereotype. She's just generally an unpleasant person who's there to trade barbs with Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah, so they go on, they win their first game. A term that I'd like to throw out there, I learned from my soccer coach training, what Matthew/Martha is doing the entire time is what they call joysticking the team, where you've got your game controller and you're saying, okay, move left, move right, kick, pass, like when you're telling them every last thing to do instead of teaching them to think on their own and develop skills. You're just saying exactly what to do, and that's something you should avoid when possible, but that's his formula for success, apparently. He gets hit in the crotch, and the nurse is there on the attending to him, leafing through the first aid pamphlet, which I don't feel like a nurse should need to be doing.
Well, yeah, but it's reinforcing, it's reinforcing the idea, the amateurishness that surrounds. Look at this. The Ladybugs are the premier program in the region. Clearly, they win the trophy every year.
Yeah,
and they're being coached by some guy who doesn't know a thing about the sport because his boss wants him to do it because it makes his wife like. Everybody around here is an amateur. Nobody knows what they're doing. These are all volunteers. They sort of get this a little bit too, again, in kicking and screaming, right? How many of these people are there? Like, who's coaching? It's the dad who's like, all right, who's the nurse? It's the guy who's like, sure, I'll hold the first aid kit. Yeah, right. And nobody here really knows what they're doing. So
that's a good point. So then they went, and to celebrate, they all go back to Kimberly's house, the Mullins house, the boss's family's house, and these teen girls all decide it'd be fun to all go skipping together. This seems like a very contrived way to get Matthew/Martha to feel uncomfortable and create a comedic situation. That does not ring true to me.
You and I both have younger sisters who I had friends over. Now, I did not have a pool at any house I grew up in. I don't recall you having one either.
We did. We didn't use it often, but we did.
I don't. Yeah, I have to say I don't recall that. That doesn't.
It just doesn't see it, especially for it to be like a coordinated thing. Like, oh, we're all going out to go skinny dipping. Like, no, like maybe if you're at a party and one person decides, oh, I'm going to be crazy and I'm going to tear off my clothes and jump in, and then maybe other people join her or something. But it just felt very forced and strange.
Yes.
But of course, if that's what it takes to get Rodney Dangerfield to also wear a dress, I guess that's worth it in the end or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Again, everything is all of these are meant to be setups of jokes. Like that's they're all.
Yeah.
But
so
yes,
then,
it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we get what is supposed to be a funny and touching moment. I guess we have Chester and Jack A sitting in the car, making a duet out of Great Balls of Fire. This is the montage of them winning, and they're starting to win. They win game after game, and I don't get it. I don't know, but that didn't land for me. But they go on, and then we have the sweet, maybe slightly cringy pep talk that Chester gives to Penny Pester about, well, if you want the guys to pay attention to you, you can let your hair down a little bit and take off those glasses. You don't need to see or anything. It's strangely, I guess there is another glasses connection with Kicking and Screaming. But yeah, so it was. This goes against all of the safe sport training that I've done. Like the alarm bells are going off in my head from these like abuse prevention training things that I have to do for soccer and baseball, and I had to do for lacrosse. It's like this conversation, especially like one-on-one away from the rest of the team, like today, this is an example of what not to do.
Yeah. All I'll say is, yeah. Yeah. But again, that's one of those. It's given. Obviously, so many of these are given with a certain undercurrent of humor. That one is given like straight. You're supposed to take it as is, which is
right. And that's a good thing. It's a touching moment. Like he's helping this girl.
Right. As only Rodney Dangerfield can. He can't be too serious. I mean, you don't need glasses. You don't need them to see. Like, okay, yes, thank you, Rodney. Yep. You're a comedian. We know.
Yeah. So then we get into the falling action where everything falls apart during the Mrs. Doubtfire scene that we talked about, which it's funny that like Mrs. Doubtfire is our touch point, even though it came out after this, just because no one really saw this movie. So it all falls apart and she kicks Chester out of the house. And then we have what is a really funny bit where you've got Chester at the bar telling all his problems to the bartender. And you've got Matthew at the soda shop like you had in the 50s. I don't think those still existed in 1992. Like a place for a kid to go and just like order a malt. Like I don't think those existed anymore. But it was funny. It was well done.
That was a really good scene. And again, it gets the great one-liner about Roddy's dad, which was pretty good. I have to say, that was pretty good.
And also the best line from someone who wasn't Rodney Dangerfield: "I've been stood up, shook up, hung up, screwed up, and tied up." Yeah. So, anyways, well, at least I beat the check. So, yeah, we have the Flames are the final team that we're going up against here, and they're practicing before a game with an obstacle course. I can't imagine a team bringing with obstacle course equipment to warm up before a game. That seems like, again, for show, just to kind of build them up as like, this is how we're going to do our Ivan Drago, like Soviet training montage. Like, these are the unbeatable team. Like, that's how
right. They're super tough. Obviously, the coach is clearly military. The military, we're gonna be tough like that. That's it. Just reemphasizes that. No, I would not do that from perspective of teaching soccer. It feels to me counterintuitive to have them jump through tires or whatever it was they were doing. But
something else I wanted to ask you about its accuracy. So then we have the Star Spangled Banner performed by some local school's marching band, and it was really, really bad. Is that what we should expect from a high school marching band, or is that comically bad? Like,
well, yes, it's comically bad. I mean,
but realistically, is the question.
No, I mean, well, not if they practiced. I mean, like they were obviously weren't any good. I mean, again, everything about this is supposed. Yeah. As serious as they take it, it's amazing how much of it is supposed to come off as being a bit cut rate, right? I mean, of course. Or the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile is there at halftime. Why not? I mean, that's,
yeah, really. Yeah.
For 9 year for what were they again? Were 9-year-olds? I guess they were probably closer to like 11-year-olds or something. Mm-hmm. Still, like, sure, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, so then we get Matthew stopping by just to see how it's going, ready to become Martha again, and Chester's like, no, okay, this has gone far enough. Like, he kind of finally sees the error of his ways. Matthew gives him a pep talk in a nice turn from the typical formula, and cuts to the core of Chester's personality problems in a way that a kid probably wouldn't. I don't think that that's necessarily realistic for like an 11, 12-year-old kid, but it works, and Chester tells the team there's no Martha, and they all start crying.
Yeah, I do think though it does speak to Brandis's abilities as an actor to actually pull that off. I mean, you give a fairly serious speech from someone who's supposed to be, a teenager, effectively. I think actually he speaks to his ability as a performer. It was pretty good, I have to say.
Yeah, it was definitely. So then we have the game. It is being reffed by former professional Emilio Romero, and this team only scores when Coach Bull commands them to, which was a pretty funny bit. I laughed out loud, literally, when Chester yells out, "Incoming!" and Coach Bull hits the tag.
Yeah.
I guess making fun of PTSD along with pedophilia and race and all those other things. So Martha goes to Kimberly and reveals himself, and the Wienermobile and the Wiener Lady comes in. We have Martha bringing Kimberly back into the game and revealing to the whole team, and the beauty queen immediately starts acting like, oh no, there's a cute boy in front of me. What I need to act silly instead of like a soccer player.
Yeah.
But Chester stands up for himself and to Mullins and puts Kimberly in the game, and she ends up winning. So they come back and after they come back and score in the second half, a nail gets broken, which riles up everyone, which it's that kind of movie.
It's obviously played for laughs, but I have to say this: I assume you've had a situation where either on your toe or finger, a nail is actually broken. It hurts, man. It is not a pleasant experience. I mean, obviously, that's not what's happening here. This is
it's basically it's a cosmetic thing. These are probably fake nails.
Yes, but like. I mean, if you play contact sports, so I mean, that hurts. It's not a pleasant experience to have that happen.
So it all ends up wrapping up as Kimberly gets to take the penalty kick, even though the father tells him not to let her do it and all that. And she miraculously manages to get it into the goal instead of going high. Somebody told her at some point to keep her knee over the ball. And they win the game. And the boss is not angry. He's actually impressed that he went to such great lengths to secure victory, because this guy doesn't have any growth throughout the movie. It's still all about the victory to him.
Oh, yes.
So then the movie ends on a high note with we believe that he's decided that Chester wants to continue coaching, and so he coaches baseball, and Mullins and Chester, the boss and him, are on the bus for a baseball team, and Coach Cannoli, which is a great name for Tommy Lasorda, an MLB coach that makes his cameo here. He mentions rumors of that there's a boy on the team, and then he turns around and tells them, oh wait, they're not a baseball team, they're a softball team. Come on, girls, let's go.
Yeah.
And then we get the closing line. I finally got some respect.
Yep.
It almost feels like this should have ended his career, but it didn't. It didn't do as well as it was hoped to, and Rodney Dangerfield blamed the marketing that it was marketed as a family movie when, like we began with saying, it really wasn't. This is a teen movie, not a kids movie. So
yeah.
But so do we want to talk about some more thoughts and details on Ladybugs, or move on to Kicking and Screaming?
I think it's time to shift the attention to Kicking and Screaming. I'm sure we'll bring up some more references and connections as we go, but I think it's time to.
All right. Well, before we do that, let's share some useful info with our viewers and listeners. So when Keith and I get together to record, we use a tool called Zencastr. It's something that we've been using for a long time, and it makes our lives super easy, because all you have to do to record a podcast with Zencastr is log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. You can record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. It is an all-in-one solution, so if you've thought about podcasting before and gave up thinking you needed a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and then distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. If that sounds good to you, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. As always, there's a link in the description to take you there. I want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all our podcasting and content needs. It's time for you to share your story. So, kicking and screaming. This one I found myself liking less after the rewatch. Do you have an opening kicking and screaming statement?
Well, I only watched them both one time, but Will Ferrell. I mean, he's done quite a few. I was thinking, mostly comparing it, obviously, but not just to Ladybugs, but also in terms of a fair amount of he's done a fair amount of sports movies as well.
Oh yeah. What are you thinking of?
Well, really, in a lot of ways, I think the ones that are good actors are really do well as parodies. Talladega Nights is
okay.
Very funny. And I am a big fan of Blades of Glory, which is his male figure skater movie.
I've wanted to see that. I haven't seen that. That's on my list. I don't know if it's literally on my list, but I saw about it when it came out. I want to see that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and both of them work, and I love Blades of Glory in large part because I'm a big fan of the Olympics, and so
okay,
I think it does a good job of sort of skewering some of the Olympics and some of the silly things that go along around that. And the Talladega Nights is just very funny.
That I've seen. That is funny. Yeah.
Talladega Nights is very good. It's amazing. This movie came out right after Anchorman, which sort of is. Okay. I guess if you had to pick one quintessential Will Ferrell movie, I think Anchorman's probably the most.
Yeah.
It was probably the most famous of them.
Although I don't know, to a lot of people, I think they might say Elf. I think that's one that is deep in people's hearts and psyches.
Yes, I guess what I'd say is I think Elf stands on its own as opposed to Anchorman is a Will Ferrell movie.
That's true.
You get the distinction I'm making. But it is impressive. Elf is the modern Christmas classic, as it were.
Yeah.
Which is also very good. But yes, this is kicking and screaming. I don't really know what it's parodying. I guess this is really what I'm leading into. Like Talladega Nights works on its own terms, but also, as a parody of sort of racing and racing culture and things like that. And then, I'm just blanking, Blades of Glory and the Olympics and some of the self-seriousness that goes into that.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue it's a parody of the over-seriousness of parents and coaching, but they don't do a very good job of that, I guess is the way to say that. This is not a particularly good one, I guess.
I would say overall that it's maybe giving this movie too much credit to try and think about what it's trying to do. Maybe that's where I'm coming at from it. It's not trying to parody anything in particular. I don't think it really has much of a point to it that I was able to discern. Just being an over-competitive idiot is bad. That's maybe the biggest point I could draw out of it, but...
Yeah, and there's a lot of what frustrated me, I guess, most about it is there's a lot of weird angles this could have taken, which I think could have been interesting. To me, the biggest missed opportunity in this whole thing is the stepbrother. That he has a brother who's a child who's born when he's an adult, right. And they literally do nothing with that until the very the very last line at the end of the game, and it's just
yeah.
What?
Yeah, there is one or two mentions of him being the kid's uncle a couple times. But that isn't really relevant. It's only relevant insofar as it's the reason that father and son come into conflict with each other. Buck wouldn't be coaching if he didn't have a son who he was coaching, right? Yeah,
but even then, right? I mean, their conflict the character, Robert Duvall's character, so strikes as the kind of guy who, he runs a sporting goods store. He's obviously a super competitive guy. He's the kind of guy who would be a coach. Now, again, I am, old enough. There was certainly an age where you actually did have coaches of these teams who weren't somebody's parents.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that. I don't know. I mean, you may have seen some of that examples of that too. And so the idea that he necessarily needed a son to be coaching the team, like that doesn't. Like I don't. Like I understand why that comes, and obviously, basically, Will Ferrell becomes the coach because nobody else would do it, and so
Right.
which is how I know how it happens in a lot of places, or at least stereotypically how it happens in a lot of places. But I could buy that. He's an over competitive. He has an over competitive father who's clearly very deeply connected to this. Gives him the soccer ball in his crib as a child. And the idea that he'd still be coaching a youth team at that age doesn't strike me as terribly unusual, even without the conceit of the son. Like, I get the idea that he's overshadowed. He brings his girlfriend home, says, I just got engaged, his fiance, and he realizes his father's gotten engaged on the same day. But they do nothing with that either. Like,
yeah.
Who is this woman? Is she substantially younger? Is she even if it had just been I don't know, she was a school friend of his, something that would make it particularly weird, but then it's just he's just getting remarried. Oh, well, okay.
Right.
I mean, that's not, when you say it that way, it doesn't seem weird, but somehow it's meant to set up again, just one of those things. There's so many different things that could have gone with and done with here that just, they sort of didn't. And I'm kind of left wondering, what were you trying to do here?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know that it will necessarily serve us well to go through the plot point by point with Kicking and Screaming as much, because there really isn't much of a plot in a way. I mean, it's really, you have the beginning where he has to fill in where, the son is fired from the grandfather's team because he's not good enough. And then
he's traded because you can make trades, and you can make trades in sports apparently.
He's not traded because he didn't get anyone in return for him.
Oh yeah.
He uses the word trade and then admits, no, actually I didn't even get anyone in exchange for him. So he just got rid of him from the team. So yeah, you have the coach backing down. You have the first game that goes as badly as you'd expect given this team's reputation.
And because it's a sports movie and they have to be bad as it begins, otherwise there's no...
Yeah, comically worse than any player I've ever seen at that age or younger play the game, just like in Ladybugs at the very beginning too. It was like that. So then we do fairly early on get Mike Ditka, which is a bright spot in this movie, and the only reason I recommended this movie to my parents while it was still streaming on Amazon Prime. I think it may have just recently stopped, and hopefully it's somewhere else now. For anyone who's watching or listening to this and wants to experience it, who hasn't already, God help you. But Mike Ditka was funny. He was surprisingly good in this movie. I wouldn't have expected him to deliver a good performance, but he does. He's being himself, which helps. But he was pretty funny.
I have to say, I thought it was interesting that they actually had him not play Mike Ditka, but be it's Mike Ditka. It's not Mike Ditka playing some character who's a thinly veiled version of himself.
Right.
He's the actual Mike Ditka. He's they make there's kind of the humor. He shows up with the kids and, Do you know who this is? Of course they don't know who this
Sammy
is.
Sosa?
They retire. He was famous Chicago sports star. But I did find that fascinating that he was, I did find it interesting he was there. Set up sorry, no, go ahead.
Well, no, so it's a way of addressing what I talked about earlier, where the coach doesn't grow at all. And if Ladybugs had gone in a completely different direction, if it was a different kind of movie, you would have had the fiance's son come in as an assistant coach who would know how the game works or how games in general work and help Chester in that situation. You have Mike Ditka in that role where, no, he doesn't know soccer, but at this level, he doesn't need to know soccer. He just needs to know how to get kids to focus behind the goal and concentrate and, play the game, right? He knows what he needs to know for competition at this level. And he's in it because he wants to humiliate Buck. He wants to defeat him. And that was so funny with the blowing the leaves over the fence. That was one of the things that got me laughing.
I'd say there is I do listen to a soccer podcast for New York City, and they take the clip they use it as a sound clip every time if they think the coach has said something ridiculous or in a defense of his action, they will play the clip of Ditka going, "Zip it, kid! I'm a coach who knows about winning." Which, so I'd heard that a bunch of times on that before I watched this, and then I heard it in the movie, and I started laughing for no apparent reason. It just it appeared, and I was like, "Oh, I know that. Now that's what that's from." Okay,
yeah, that's funny. So we're introduced to a cast of characters. We have, the different kids, each with their own quirk. We have the parents of the one short kid going out of their way to give a book to Will Ferrell, talking about how shy he is, and before the scene is even over, we see him acting as outgoing as anyone else, and maybe even more so. And there's a bunch of stuff like that where if the movie were created more capably, that may have been an intentional joke. It may have been that the joke was that these parents have this kid as a status symbol to show how liberal-minded they are. Oh, look, we adopted this kid from another country or something like that. Look at us. And they don't actually know or care about him. That was there for the taking, but it instead just looks incongruous and like, what? He's shy? No, he's not. And then it's not funny anymore. Like it.
Yeah. Right. Again, it's sort of that missed opportunity again throughout, because the movie's not about the kids. It's not even really about the parents. The parents are, sort of there to be foils for Will Ferrell to, sort of, I guess, slowly lose his mind for his character to lose his mind. The coffee bit was
weird.
Like.
Well, and that's another thing where, again, like, I don't know how much of it is an attempt at a specific joke, but it's like, are we really meant to believe that his addiction to coffee is fueling this behavior of his? Because it kind of implies that, but not full-throatedly, which would be ridiculous. Again, unless like maybe they're making some parallel, like if it is a parody of tropes in like movies about, not really, I can't think of this happening in sports movies. It's more like Hollywood celebrities, like musicians or actors or something, but like he's on drugs and the drugs are causing him to do things. And caffeine is a very minor drug, but like maybe it was a parody of that idea, but not done well enough to really stand out as such.
I don't see it as that. I think it's the idea of, because that's the subplots you get in the sports movies are either especially with kids, is about the improvement of the team so that they win at the end. But there is also the sense of some of them who sort of like Matthew and Ladybugs, right? They start out being too serious and they have to learn how to have fun, right? To sort of let go of the competitiveness and have fun with the game, play the game, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, the idea is as a character, he's losing his way because he's becoming like his father, becoming a bad version of his father, who's just super competitive at everything. Now, his father comes off as slightly better adjusted, obviously, even though we were supposed to realize that he's, a bit of a maniac. And there are a whole lot of things he does that are kind of like, oh, that doesn't seem like really good parenting at all. But, which is, again, is part of where the humor comes from all that. But yeah, I just sort of feel like, it is supposed to be his character arc. But I think, again, like there's sort of I'm not quite sure where they're going with it, because he starts out as kind of this non-competitive, kind of nebbish person.
Mm-hmm.
And they turn him into someone who's obviously super competitive, a bad version of his father. And worse. It seems to me worse in some way. Yeah. I mean, again, particularly bad in some cases, because he's actually not very good at any of this. His one big strategy is, give it, just let the good kids play.
Mm-hmm.
And he loses sight. He benches his son when the whole point was his son was going to play, and this is really about family. And it feels to me like there's, again, missed opportunity. There's a chance you sort of play it at the end where he takes it, he learns, okay, it's okay to be competitive, it's okay to want to win, and it's okay to, but just, don't forget that this is still supposed to be fun and everything else, but it's okay to want to win and be competitive. And he never quite, they don't quite get to that,
Yeah. But yeah, so before long, Ditka takes him to get some fresh meat. And we're introduced to the two Italians, and there's some good bits with them. Like, I laughed so hard when they drop him off at the first game, and we hear "Prima La Carne." Like, 'cause we've been hearing in English, meat comes first, which was funny enough, and then "Prima La Carne," like that was that got me. That was pretty funny. So, and they are clearly good, and it's the Martha strategy. Like, all you need to win games is like one or two good players, and they carry the team apparently. One thing that I will,
you coach youth soccer. Surely you've seen that.
Yes, unfortunately not my own teams. But some of the teams we play against, like their goals are primarily scored by like one or two kids. That is true. But when the movie is about like sportsmanship and becoming a better athlete and winning isn't everything, like you would hope that they're making that both of these movies don't focus on making the kids on the team any better. Now, the Italians actually accomplish that way better than the coaches, it turns out, in this movie.
Right. You see them, actually, they're the coaches. They're the ones teaching them how to do things. Now, partly because they know how to do those things.
Right.
But I do also think, again, this is the idea that for someone like, and Rodney Dangerfield gets this a little bit when, with his heart-to-hearts with some of the players, and Will Ferrell sort of gets this with his son, right? The idea that as the coach, in a sense, the tactics don't really matter. It's about reaching them and helping them grow. And again, that's where you get that through line of time. We get you to Ted Lasso, who's like, he doesn't have to, as a character, he doesn't have to know anything about the sport. It's about helping them grow as individuals. Right. And as a result, because they become better people, they become better players. In their case, obviously, they're doing the professionals who already have a certain level of talent. And then it leads to the scene where Pep Guardiola shakes his hand and pretends he doesn't care about winning, which is just the thing that is the thing that is the most unbelievable in the entire series. But anyway.
Yeah. It goes on. They start winning with the Italians. You get one of my favorite parts of this movie that overall I didn't like, but one of the parts I did like was when the Italians aren't able to make it because they've got a huge order that came in. They have to work at the butchery, and the whole team goes to help them. Yeah, which that's good. Like, as far as like building morale and team spirit, like good, that was a good scene to have. But then what really got me is when they come back in the meat truck and they all walk out and their jerseys are covered in blood and the other team just forfeits. that was pretty funny.
Again, right, the idea of them coming together and helping each other and all of that, like there's a moment in there you could pull something from it, but it's just about the joke, which is you're right, it's a very funny joke. But it just kind of, again, there's something that could have been there and they don't go with it. And and then you wind up with and then they're in the final.
Yeah. And by the way, I neglected to mention so far. So apparently their whole league only has one referee. And this referee is the actor who played Michael Bolton in Office Space. Yes. Not the no talent clown, but the Michael Bolton who's in the movie. But yeah, it was funny. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else besides.
Why doesn't he just go by Mike? Yeah.
So he's officiating and not handing out red cards for things that should clearly be red cards, not least of which some of the maneuvers that the Italians were teaching the team to do, like the ball on the back of the neck and the player on your shoulders to head the ball in. Those are things that at least IMDb is of the opinion that those are against FIFA regulations, that would not, against the laws of the game, and would not be tolerated.
Which I don't believe is actually true. Okay. For example, and I wish I could think, or it's a neck hold or something, but the idea of like, kicking the ball up and cradling it, it's a parlor trick. Like, it's a neat thing to be able to do. It's not that it's illegal in the game. It's just completely impractical. Like, there's nothing, you could walk with it, I suppose, but you think about the kind of balance and how slowly you have to move. And it doesn't take, again, it's a contact sport, a bump and the ball goes off. And then what are we doing here? Yeah. So in a sense that they're not, they're quite legal. They're just, like, why? That's really the problem with them, is that they don't really serve a point.
Yeah, why is not a question that this movie bothers with too much, such as eating a worm. Why?
Well, that of all the things, like, pretty gross. But like, I get where that, like, okay, it's meant to be. This is this character's trait. This is who
right.
he
That's
is.
his thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fine. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, and of course, every single thing that they tell us about in that opening scene when they're introducing themselves comes back in this last game, and they find some way to work it in. And yeah, but
which, again, there's some skill in that, right? The idea of pulling all the pieces together. Something, it is a bit of the Chekhov's worm, right? A worm introduced in the first scene will be eaten in the final game, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, Chekhov's worm! How far we've fallen. But so yeah, over, and the one kid gets what he deserves, gets kicked into the pool at the end for his obnoxious sense of humor.
Yeah.
But I will say a couple things to point out with Kicking and Screaming. There were a couple funny details that it doesn't draw attention to, which was classy on their part. But like some of the names, like the town that they live in is Highland Heights, which is just a funny name. Like that got to me. Or like the college that he went to is East Western University. That was funny. Like some small details, like the Italians' jerseys don't have their names on the back when the rest of the kids do, which makes sense. They were late additions to the roster, so they got like a couple spare jerseys or something, right? Like that makes sense. When you see Phil's jersey from when he was a kid in this flashback all the way at the end, talking about how his father, benched him in the key game or whatever. It's a different jersey that looks like it's from a different time period. It looks like, from around the era of Ladybugs, like when Will Ferrell was a kid. Yeah. It was, there are some good details. Like it isn't an awful movie. It's not like the worst movie I ever saw. It's just, there's a general lack of finesse, I guess you would say. It's just like there's a bit of a spaghetti approach to the humor, and more of it falls off of the wall than sticks to it, Right.
Yeah. And that's, again, it just feels like what it really needs. This is the instructor me coming out. I see this with students sometimes. They have a lot of interesting ideas in their paper, but what they need is like, what's the through line? What's the thesis? What's this all coming back to and proving? Because again, that's why the parodies are so effective. Is like at the end of the day, Anchorman is a parody of local news, and all the jokes ultimately flow back to the idea of the inherent ridiculousness of the local news broadcast and the self-importance of the people involved. But that's partly why it works so well. Is that you always know they're always pulling themselves back to that. They're always going back to that. I don't know where they're really like what's the underlying thing here. There's a couple things it could be. Mm-hmm. But that means it isn't any of those things. That's the problem. Yeah. So I'm going to just kind of rattle off some interesting things that I noticed that were just kind of strewn about. So for one thing, we see the company Score a lot in Ladybugs. They're the jersey manufacturer and the equipment provider for the Ladybugs team. They're still around today. That's what our league actually uses. Like our jerseys are by Score, and our balls and a lot of our equipment are all Score. So that's kind of funny. I wish that someone did verbalize like the simple thing, like Kimberly kicks the ball high. There's an easy fix for that. Like teach it to her. I wish that someone said, keep your hand over the ball. Like that would have been like, it would have been so easy to work it in at some point. And who knows, maybe the people working on this movie weren't really that familiar with soccer. One thing that I give the movies credit for compared to United, for instance, they actually show action on the field. Like, and even Next Goal Wins didn't show like that much in-game soccer action, right? Mm-hmm. Like aside from the final in that movie, like it's pretty much like glossed over. They do in this movie. It's funny with Ladybugs. It's mostly player A gets the ball and holds it unopposed, like carries it down the field unopposed until they score. Like you never see any interactions between players, which is probably just the difficulty of choreographing that and working with child actors on something like that is difficult. And you get that a little bit more in Kicking and Screaming, but not too much. I also so we recently had my son do evaluations to play at the slightly more competitive level, and with his soccer team for next year. And they were telling us that when it comes to the league in New York State, and I imagine that other leagues and other places have similar rules, there are requirements that you need to play each player at least 50% of the time.
So you basically can't, if you have like a 7v7 division, you can't have a roster with more than 14 kids on it, right? There's a cap on it because you can't just bench players. Like at this level, if they're not playing, they're not growing, and growth is the point, right? So that makes some of both of these a little bit more with kicking and screaming, but it makes them a little bit more ridiculous. And who knows, that could be that things have changed since 2005 and certainly since 1992. But it struck me with both of these that, most of these movies are, and these two in particular, are both focused on winning is not the most important thing. Like, we're supposed to know that Mullins's attitude that the Ladybugs win at all costs is not healthy, but the main teams end up winning anyway.
Yes, but there's a point. The point there is a bit about self-actualization, right? Once you can win once you realize that winning isn't important, right? Because it's the obsession with winning that causes you to lose. Like, it causes you to lose focus is the idea. But I don't think that's ultimately the underlying message there. Because for Rodney Dangerfield, it's not about winning; it's about winning for the right reasons. Like, at first he wants to win for the promotion, and then he wants to win to build a better relationship with his future stepson. That becomes a positive thing. Or for Matthew, it's about the stepson. It's about learning how to be a teammate as opposed to just being the best player and winning the game because you're the best player.
Right.
And again, sort of, this is an idea that I think is less fully formed when we get to kicking and screaming as well. But the idea about competition and that, it's not about being competitive; it's about being, do your best, right, and have fun. I mean, that's an important part of kids. It is a kids' sports movie ultimately, and part of the goal is they're fun and they're happy.
So you take issue with IMDb's commenters pointing out that move is illegal. I take issue with a different comment. Someone commented that it's unrealistic for the Italians to be subbed off and then back on again, that's against the rules. No, come on. In the professional leagues, yes. But at the youth level, no. I mean, like, at our level, the players go on and off like 4 or 5 times in a game. It's just the reality.
Well, I do wonder, because again we're playing fast and loose with the imagined world of this league, right? I mean, there's clearly some structure to this league, like far more, for example, than like I ever had. I played. Yeah, and to call them leagues really kind of overstates it. I don't recall us keeping standings anywhere, having a playoff or anything like that. I mean, the more organized you get, the more rules you have. And yes, especially if you're dealing with, it wouldn't surprise me if that commentators from Europe, where they actually have a lot of rules that go into the format, because the youth leagues are meant to mimic the adult leagues, and so you get used to playing that way. And so there are rules about substitutions and things like that. And the idea is, because for them, the games are less important than the practice. You practice, and then you go to the game, and the idea is, okay, once you're done with the game, then you sit and cool off. Whereas, again, for rec league sports for kids in the U.S., the point is to go run around. And so, of course, we're just going to rotate them on and off, because the whole point is everybody gets on there and runs as much as they can, and you wear the kids out. So they're not no one is making any comments about like future stardom here for any, like, none of these. There's no jokes. There's not even a joke or even a reference to the idea that any of these kids are being like scouted, or there's a team. Obviously, Ladybugs wouldn't have a team to watch them, but I mean, Kicking and Screaming comes out, the 10th season of MLS. Like, you could easily make a reference to the Chicago Fire, because they clearly talk about being in Chicago. Although, yes, you lived in the city. It feels like there's a lot of sunshine for Chicago.
It's not an unsunny place.
It was let's put it this way: it was Chicago by way of Southern California. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, maybe
weather-wise, I think.
So some trivia that I found interesting about each movie. So, Ladybugs, on a personal note, came out on my sister's 3rd birthday, like to the day. It was directed by the director of Superman. No, not Richard Donner, the director of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. That's how this comes to you. Jonathan Brandis was 15 or 16 when this came out, which is probably a little bit older than his character was meant to be. But yeah, as mentioned, he very sadly died only 11 years later, which was actually 1 year before Rodney Dangerfield. So Rodney Dangerfield outlived him by a year. I thought it was really interesting. Leo DiCaprio auditioned for the role of Matthew. You want to know why they didn't go with him? He looked too convincing in drag, and it killed the humor of the joke. That's what That's what they say.
That's that's an interesting one.
As mentioned, Emilio Romero performed the role of the referee toward the end. I guess he was in the North American Soccer League, and the ASL, is that the American Soccer League?
Yes, which included a team, I mentioned this on a t-shirt, called the Colorado Foxes.
Oh, right.
So yeah, I don't know enough about him to say that he played for them, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. What's funny, so looking at the way this movie was received, so as mentioned, like, it kind of bombed at the box office because of the way that it was marketed, much to Rodney Dangerfield's chagrin. He disagreed with that. So it has 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm not surprised that critics didn't like this movie. But 43% audience score is lower than I would have thought. Like, I would have thought that this would have been above 50%. But it actually got an A- from CinemaScore. I'm not particularly familiar with CinemaScore, but somebody out there thinks that it's not bad. But it did find its audience on cable TV eventually. There's the whole like joke that comes up a couple times in the movie of Matthew calling him Chesterfield. That's like a little like dig at him. That's just something he calls him. I guess that's a real joke that Brandis would make in real life about people. He'd just add field onto people's names. He'd like call you Keith Field or whatever. Like, that's just a joke that he did, and they worked it into the movie.
See, I on that one. So Chesterfield is a fairly well-known brand of cigarettes, which is what I figured that was a reference to.
Apparently not.
And in fact, I actually thought his name. I actually thought his character's name was Chesterfield, which I was like, well, that's unsubtle.
No, not that. So they were originally supposed to film in Dallas, but apparently they moved it to Colorado and filmed in Denver just because the heat. They need to get out of the heat for being outside shooting so much and the kids running around and stuff. Mm-hmm. What a different movie this would have been if they had gotten who they wanted to play the assistant coach's role, the assistant's role. They wanted Whoopi Goldberg instead of Jack A. I guess she was their first choice, but she chose Sister Act over this, and I can't say I blame her. I think this wouldn't have done her career as big a favor as Sister Act ended up doing. But again,
it's one of those, like, I don't think of these two movies as being simultaneous, but effectively they were, which is fascinating to me.
Right, and I do wonder what effect that would have had on this movie. That if it had Whoopi Goldberg and Rodney Dangerfield in it, it might be part of the conversation today. It might be something that's more well remembered that would have possibly done better. So interesting. Rodney Dangerfield was as much older than Eileen Graff, who played Bess, his fiance, as he looks. He was like 27 years older than her at the time that they shot this.
He definitely looks older.
Yeah, he was.
He looks like Rodney Dangerfield. So yeah.
But yeah, I guess he didn't look that much younger, even in Caddyshack, when he was, significantly younger. So there's that. And then what had me laughing as I was scrolling through IMDb after it was over is that apparently several of the Flames players in this final match in Ladybugs were actually boys in wigs, not girls. I was laughing very hard. And I wonder, is one of them Leo DiCaprio?
Hey,
Meanwhile, with Kicking and Screaming, the critics liked it more. It's 41% on Rotten Tomatoes compared to the 14 that Ladybugs got, which I strongly disagree with. Roger Ebert actually gave it 3 out of 4 stars. I think this is after Siskel and Ebert had already been done. I think it was probably after Gene Siskel passed. Boy, a lot of people were talking about this episode have died. But
yes, well, the last one was the Munich air disaster. So I mean, like, we
got to keep it totally consistent, right?
I have to say, I suspect with Ebert's rating, I wonder how much of that is dealing with expectations, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Right. I mean, because and I recall this was a couple of years ago. Someone was reviewing King Kong versus Godzilla. And the first line of the review was, "Look, this is a movie where a giant lizard fights a giant monkey. It is the title says exactly what it is. There's no, like, in that regard, it gives me everything I wanted." So I think in this, it gives you It was just Will Ferrell being Will Ferrell.
Exactly. It was absolutely, his review was of the mind, like, look, if you're looking for a family movie with soccer, it's fairly enjoyable, basically.
Yeah. It definitely fits. It's definitely much more family friendly than Ladybugs. That's, I think, is clear to say.
And apparently over the years, it has become the highest grossing soccer movie, beating Bend It Like Beckham, which that surprises me that, like, of all the movies, this one is the highest grossing soccer movie of all time. Like, I guess as of a certain year, I don't know. I can't think of anything that's come since this that would have eclipsed it.
I mean, again, it doesn't, years. that actually doesn't surprise me a great deal because, I mean, quickly, who's the most famous person in Bend It Like Beckham?
Keira Knightley.
Well, yeah, but I mean, compared to Will Ferrell, as far as like someone who moves the needle,
yeah,
like, I mean,
that's true, yeah.
People, and again, this came right after Anchorman, and Elf. Right. I mean, think about two movies back to back years.
That's
really
true.
Sort of, so in that sense, Will Ferrell it's Will Ferrell movie. Of course, we're going to see it.
Well, and I guess the broad appeal, like, it is a family movie, and it probably, I don't know when it came out. It might have come out at a time of year like Memorial Day or like some holiday week or weekend when a lot of people went out to the theater to see it or something. Yeah, it's
And I think in both of these cases, I think a little less so in Ladybugs, but definitely Kicking and Screaming. Like, if he took over and coached a football team, is the movie really any different?
Right.
There's nothing intrinsically soccer related. I think with Ladybugs, there are some of the jokes that work better because it's soccer and where soccer fits in the American zeitgeist, so to speak. I think makes it a little bit more important to the movie itself.
They make fun of the obscurity of soccer a little bit more in that movie.
And Will Ferrell shows up and he's coaching a golf team. Like, what's different here? What's really different in this movie?
Yeah. Will Ferrell was nominated that year for Worst Actor at the Raspberries for two performances, this and Bewitched. Bewitched, I somehow ended up with a copy on DVD. I don't know how, someone got it for me. I don't want to shame anybody. I think it was my wife at the time got that for me. But it's not. I never hated it. I'm not entirely surprised though that it might have ended up with the Raspberries.
We should be careful with the phrasing there. That your wife got it for you at the time, as opposed to your wife at the time, implying that she is no.
Right, she was my girlfriend at the time. My now wife. Yes.
Okay, yeah. just so we're clear.
Thank you. So Will Ferrell stated that it is his favorite movie that he's made for sentimental reasons, because I guess his wife got pregnant while he was making it, and so she gave birth to their first son while he was on set for this movie. And so as he was making it, he knew that they were expecting, and he imagined making this movie that he would watch with his kids someday, which that's nice to think about. It's also very funny when you pull back for a little bit. We mentioned Elf earlier. So do you remember who plays Will Ferrell's father in Elf?
That was, hang on, I believe it
Put you on the spot a bit.
Yeah, I know. Well, no, I mean, it's not really fair because I'm just pulling up your notes where I saw you'd written there. It was Sonny Corleone.
Yes,
Sonny Corleone played
James Caan, right? And so then his father in this movie is Robert Duvall, the consigliere of the family. So you have one actor playing characters in two different movies where two different principals from The Godfather play his father. So that's pretty funny.
And let's be honest, the idea of Al Pacino playing Will Ferrell's father in a movie is entirely plausible.
Oh boy, sequel to Any Given Sunday, maybe. So meanwhile, the Italians, I guess in an early draft of the script or before they cast the movie or something, they're originally supposed to be Greek, which I thought was interesting because that I don't like them being Italian. Like, yes, Greece is from Europe, but I don't know. Maybe you have different thoughts on this. I don't think of Greece for soccer. Like, Italy, having these Italian kids makes sense in a way that Greek kids would not make sense, Yeah,
that's kind of interesting. It suggests to me they clearly had some Greek jokes in mind. I don't know what they would have been necessarily. That's how they came about it. But as soccer players, Italians makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that is an interesting bit there. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So in closing, let's give our best and worst aspects of Ladybugs and Kicking and Screaming. You want to go first with Ladybugs, your best and worst aspects of it?
All right, I'll go first. I think the best part of it for me, I'm gonna say we mentioned this, the scene where the kid is running back and forth, playing both of his personas, jumping in and out of the girl's clothes and then his regular clothes. That was a really good scene. I think it really speaks to the talent he had as an actor at that age. That's a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I enjoyed. I thought that scene was really well done overall.
Okay. And what is the worst thing about Ladybugs to you?
I think the worst thing about Ladybugs, there's probably some dead air. We'll have to edit out a little bit. I know. I'm supposed to be thinking about this the whole way. I think the worst thing about come back to me on that one. I have to think about that a bit.
So I'll say for me, the best thing about Ladybugs is the cast. Like Rodney Dangerfield, Jonathan Brandis, Vanessa Shaw, like they're all believable, like well cast actors doing a good job. You know, Rodney Dangerfield, this is an appropriate vehicle for him, in a way that Kicking and Screaming isn't for Will Ferrell. Like he doesn't get to be Will Ferrell in this movie. You could have cast any number of other people who may not have necessarily had the draw that he had in that role, but he doesn't get to do the things that make him particularly funny. Like I'm veering into Kicking and Screaming territory when I'm talking about my Ladybugs best and worst. And so I'll stop myself there for now. But the cast, like they serve the movie well. Like, this is a good vehicle. Rodney Dangerfield gets to be himself and be funny in it. Likewise, one member of the cast is also my least favorite, Jack A. Like she brought the movie down for me really badly. Just every line is over delivered and a caricature, and I found her very obnoxious.
It's gonna be really awful if we later discover it's actually pronounced Jackie. And
I don't know. You don't put an accent over it if it's just Jackie. I don't know.
I'm not gonna pretend I actually know. Again, it's one of those. I've been told. Random aside, I've been told that when you mispronounce words, it actually is a sign that you read a lot because you come across a lot of words that you have seen and you're presuming their pronunciation rather than actually knowing how to actually say them.
Sure.
Gosh, I guess I'd say the least. I guess I'd say the least favorite thing for me is, I guess the boss. Like I just kind of like other than set him up with the team. It just seems like a weird thing to sort of. I realize again, you have to sort of accept the world and the premise of the movie, but it seems like just such a weird thing to hold over someone. Coach this girl's soccer team, which we only later discover happens to contain his child. I don't know, just
right.
Never. I'm sure I gave him a lot of time to really think about it. I quote something else, but if we're thinking about characters, he just kind of
doesn't make sense.
He was a little flat for me in a way that some of the other characters weren't.
All right.
But I agree with you. The cast overall did a good job at what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, they bring it alive. Like and the humor is good. Like Rodney Dangerfield. So we talked about them throwing the spaghetti against the wall for Kicking and Screaming, and more jokes for me didn't work than did work. They almost all land for me with Rodney Dangerfield. It's funny. Like I laughed at almost every one of his. Like it was a funny movie. So Kicking and Screaming, best worst.
Best thing, I'm going to steal one. I'm going to steal this from you. I think it's Ditka. I think it's great. He's funny. The whole thing with the cigar, or that scene with the cigar and his wife, it's so telegraphed obvious what's going on. I still thought it was funny. But I thought he was good. Again, there's an incongruity, like, is he retired in Florida or California? Why is there so much sunshine in Chicago? But I thought he did good overall, and was I think the thing to me that I enjoyed the most out of Kicking and Screaming.
Yeah. And what about worst?
Worst for me, I could give a blanket statement about like all of the missed opportunities. I'm going to go with the half brother.
Okay.
Like that could have been like that sort of fits to me in sort of the Will Ferrell. Like it reminds me of Step Brothers, which is a movie that admittedly, I did not care for when I first saw it, but has improved in subsequent viewings. I mean, it's such a bizarre concept. The idea of the adult man-child, like the concept of the half brother who is the same, who is the age as your son.
Right.
And they did nothing with it in the whole movie. Yeah. That's what frustrated. And like, it just sort of is, again, the idea of the undercooked thing. That's the one that I would most look back and go, oh, there's so much potential there, and you did nothing with it. So.
Right. Yeah, good call. So yes, you did snipe me on Ditka, and I guess we'll go with draft rules. So since you drafted Ditka to your best worst list, I'll come up with a new best thing. I would say the Italians. Like, I think that overall they work. They are a bright spot in this movie. They genuinely have like good skills. Like, it's fun watching them. And that's the biggest reason. My son had expressed interest in seeing this when I brought up the two movies, whereas he didn't want to see Ladybugs, like we mentioned. He did want to see this one. It looked funny to him from the cover, I guess. The Italians are why I told him to go back and actually watch it after I did, because like watching them play, like I thought it would be a relatable way for him to kind of get into the game a little bit. Because he actually, I don't know if I mentioned this on a previous episode, but a couple weeks ago, he scored his first goal in a game this season. And he apparently has gotten addicted to the feeling. And now he still likes keeping and wants to be a goalkeeper, but he also likes playing forward and wants to work on that better. And he wants to score goals too. So I showed him, like, you want to get good, like, watch players who are good, and these guys are good. They're fun to watch. Honestly, like, I'd say the worst thing about this, if I'm being specific and not just the general things we talked about, I don't know, I'd say Will Ferrell. Like, he is not good in this movie. Like, almost every attempt at humor from him just falls flat. Like, it's just bad and disingenuous a lot of the time, and just like it just feels contrived and forced, and I was not a fan of him in this movie.
Yeah, I think he does. It's a character he plays in other movies, this sort of mild-mannered, calm, the person who seems to be keeping his calm, who then loses it. You sort of loses it at various moments, and that's part of where the humor comes from.
Yeah. But
yeah, it doesn't come off as well in this one. I don't quite know why, but it doesn't work as well. But
all right, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to talk about that we didn't cover?
Man, youth soccer's a trip. Youth soccer is a trip. Youth sports are a trip. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been involved in them. Obviously, your experience is very different. And coming, in the sense that you are in the midst of it right now, I am not. I don't have children, so I would not be like Rodney Dangerfield and have my boss just put me in charge of a team of 12-year-olds.
But I think if he did, you would be much better suited to it.
Yeah, for various reasons. I will say one last thing. We mentioned this before, and we didn't really get to go into it. I do think both of these movies sort of give you a good glimpse into the kind of comedy both of them do. Will Ferrell's is much more a absurdist, physical kind of comedy, whereas Rodney Dangerfield is about the one-liners. Everything is a setup for him to give a one-liner of some sort or another, whereas Will Ferrell is, what's the weirdest thing I could say at this moment, and then like do something like physically just run into a wall,
yeah.
So it's very interesting. I think both of them do sort of show, two stars. I mean, that's what they are. They're they're stars, and the very different styles they can bring to a movie or and how the vehicle is sort of built around them.
So overall, if anyone is watching or listening to this and they have not seen either of these movies, would you recommend either?
I could be convinced to recommend Ladybugs. Again, I think it's one, if you're thinking about one for a little adult time, so to speak, Ladybugs. I think for kids, Kicking and Screaming is more appropriate, but it is definitely the weaker of the two films. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I would say overall, I would recommend Ladybugs to an appropriate audience. Kicking and Screaming, like I said, the only reason I recommended it to my parents is because of Ditka, and we have a strong family history of Chicago Bears, and especially his era of Chicago Bears. Mm-hmm. I was named after that team. And it's funny, like I laughed too when Will Ferrell said, yeah, the 86 Bears is like 85. And it's funny because like they won the Super Bowl in 86, but it was the 85 season that they won it for. And I knew that because it all ties into my birthday.
Yes, but the whole point, of course, of the joke is that Will Ferrell doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well,
right?
It's kind of funny. Like it did, because I knew the particulars, it didn't come off that way to me as much. But I know like the whole idea was like, you really don't know who I am, do you? Like he says that to him at one point. And yeah, I get that was the attempted joke, but the details kind of actually convinced me that he knew more than they were letting on. If you were more off, it would have been more believable to me. Yeah. But anyways, thanks for joining us at Gooner U Film Studies. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube. There's a link in the show notes to take you there. Wherever you watch or listen, join other smart and considerate listeners like yourself and like, subscribe, rate, or review, or share the show. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can find us on Twitter to get updates and to ask questions. Check out our description for links to everything we talk about, as well as our sponsor and our Twitter pages and other social media. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches eventually when they come back next season.
And occasional soccer movies.